All right, we're live. Welcome to Creator Conversations on Sutra. And I'm here with Dr. Stephanie Mines, who is a neuropsychologist and the creator of the Tara approach and the founder of Climate Change and Consciousness, and a all-around very active creator of all things amazing. Welcome, Stephanie. It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you, Lawrence. It's great to be here with you.
I'd love to. So today we would kind of want to go dive deep into your experience with creating relational learning spaces online, and maybe before we get into that, I'd love to just have you share a little bit about what Tara is and the background, the context of your work.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So the Tara approach for the resolution of shock and trauma was developed actually in 1994 in response to the AIDS epidemic. So interesting that we're kind of coming around to another epidemic, pandemic condition that is creating a new evolution of the Tara approach. So I am a neuropsychologist and also an embryologist, and my focus has been in those careers as a trauma expert, someone who really was fascinated with the human nervous system and how it responds to overwhelming experience and how it regains resilience. And that theme is still the central theme and still the most relevant theme. Originally, my work focused on AIDS, as I mentioned. I really was eager to be of service to the AIDS community, and I was. Once the protease inhibitors were developed and people were no longer, at least in the US, dying of AIDS in such great numbers, the attraction to healing from trauma was minimized. And that allowed me to explore the other areas that I focused on: survivors of sexual abuse, domestic violence. So those were areas where I really was very creative and productive and successful in working with both individuals and agencies, hospitals, trauma centers. But when the climate crisis really became a central concern for people, which was about 30 years too late, but still at that moment when it was on the tip of everyone's tongue, the understanding that the title of my book, We Are All in Shock, was even more relevant. It was written before that crisis was so well known, but became even more relevant with the daily awareness of the impacts of climate emergency. So that has created an entirely new iteration of my work, a permutation on its original wonderful synthesis. And now the pandemic, as we'll be discussing, has added yet another layer of relevance for the Tara approach. And then the founding of Climate Change and Consciousness created this other stream by which the information about how we can regenerate and find our individual and collective resilience is available to more and more people.
Beautiful, and I love your commitment to the human condition and to really, like, what I'm hearing is creating healing in the world. And I imagine that, especially since you've been doing this work so long, that you really started primarily working in person, and that with the pandemic, that's probably shifted quite a bit. And so I'm curious about how that journey has been for you. Maybe what are some of the differences you've noticed between online and in-person work, and how has the pandemic affected the way that you work online today?
The surprising thing that I have discovered is that moving to online has actually amplified the delivery of the Tara approach and climate change and consciousness. This was actually a surprise to me. I really thrive on the in-person environment, but what I discovered was that by going online, I was able to amplify the empowering aspect of my work. And the online environment upped the ante for me. It increased my creativity. I have now translated everything that I do to online formats. And my work is incredibly palpable. It's very much about hands on and it's very much about touch. So, how to translate that into an online format, it's been absolutely revelatory for me, because I would say that going online has actually made my work more effective, because previously people would relate to me as I don't like the word master of the art, but certainly I have an enormous amount of experience, and certainly I have developed the very tools that I'm delivering. So people related to me as the expert. I can't be the expert online. I mean, I can be the expert in the information, but I can't be an expert in the touch. So that means that the people who are on the receiving end of what I transmit, they have to do the applications for themselves, on themselves, as the primary learning experience. And that has become more empowering for them. So that was a surprise bonus, a gift of delivering on an online format.
That's really fascinating. How yeah, what you discover when you're kind of constrained by being online. And so I'm curious about, what, how do you go about, as you're moving all your work online, how have you redesigned it? How have you really thought about this process of um, creating, well, I guess, with, first of all, with the touch aspect of it, really creating the right guidance for people to do that properly. And I'm also wondering, just in terms of any sort of relational aspects, if that's a part of the work, in terms of like connecting people to each other, or somehow creating a space or a community. What has that been like for you?
Being required to go online required me to actually dive much more deeply into the intentionality of
Mm,
all my work. And I am someone who's always focused on intention, and I am a deep diver. But I have dived even deeper as a result of going online to really clarify the intentionality and the core concepts of what it is that I am here to deliver. And I want to add to that that a great deal of what I deliver is cutting edge. It's not common parlance. I'm delivering material that is a fusion of neuroscience and traditional healing wisdom. And I am also focused very much on embryogenesis, embryology, so the evolution of the human nervous system. So this is not easy material to deliver, and it's not material that people are generally familiar with. So there's a lot of adaptation and language development, and going online, such a creative experience for me. It required that I really dive into a whole other layer of what it is behind everything that I do. And
mm,
that actually, it's just a remarkable and almost magical process. If I didn't know the neuroscience behind it, I would say it was magical. But I know that it is actually scientific, that what has happened is that my own intelligence, my own creativity has expanded as a result of my intention, my passion to deliver these precious gifts to other people and to translate them as authentically and as purely as I possibly can, because it's online. So it has to be really clarified, it has to be simplified, it has to be delivered in language that is understandable, accurate, and also centered in who it is that I'm delivering to.
mm. And are you doing group work as well as one-on-one work?
Oh, mostly group work now.
Mostly group work.
That's another evolution
Hmm.
that I have really evolved out of one-on-one to group work. And I have really evolved out of working with people's individual traumas to training people to do that for others.
Hmm.
And
And
I would
the,
say that the online format has accelerated all of that.
mm, and the group work is over Zoom.
Yes,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
all over Zoom. Yes.
Yeah, and maybe I'd love to, if you have a story you can share. I mean, like when you're running a Zoom call. Well, first, when you're running a Zoom call, like there's the content aspect of it, and then there's the many other nuances of connection or relational space. And I'm curious, like, what do you what do you prioritize? I mean, how do you know after you've completed an experience? How do you know it was good? And how do you know it wasn't good? Because sometimes I know for myself, like I'll go through an experience and I was like, like that wasn't great. And so I'm curious for you, what are the for you internally when you're kind of like looking back and saying like, oh, that was a really good one, or that wasn't so good. Like what is that like for you?
Great question. And of course, I now have the benefit of being able to be somewhat retrospective about this
Mm,
because initially, when I began doing my programs online, I likely made a lot of errors. I would say, despite that, I was amazed at the success, even from the get go,
mm,
of what happened online. In fact, one of my students who's meeting me here in France, I happen to be in France at this moment, not far from where you are. And one of the students who came here to meet with me was from one of those very first programs 2 years ago. That was my debut online. So
mm,
I would say what I have learned over the course of this time is to not be so panicked about the timing. I would say
mm,
what the big mistake that I make, and I still make it somewhat, is to be more concerned about the timing than I am about the connection.
mm,
Because you have a time limit, and I'm acutely aware that people can't stay on Zoom for an extended period of time. So my programs used to be residential. They used to be 5 to 7 days in person. So people were frequently, staying at a retreat center or in an area that they all came to, and we would meet every day in person. I have now translated that into programs that have 3 or 4 at the most hour components over a period of time. I've also created a 9-month practitioner training program with intervals that are segments over this 9-month period. So I'm acutely aware that people cannot have 3-4 hours day after day online. It's just too taxing. So I was obsessed with how to put such rich material as I have into these condensed formats. And therefore, everything was so tightly scheduled, and I was
mm,
constantly, looking at my flow chart, which kept me out of the attuned state, which is really the
mm,
place where I get the most gratification. So I still plan very carefully for every program, but I am not so obsessed with meeting all the requirements of my flowchart. What I have learned is that there is an expansive quality to the online setting, and that just as in person, things will flow, things will find their pacing and their rhythm, and I can drop into that flow in this cyberspace environment just as I did in person.
mm. Yeah, I mean that dropping into the flow thing, kind of it requires a lot of trust. And I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, but I'm curious how you Because I also get a sense that you are offering something that can be content rich. And so how do you reconcile letting go of time with delivering everything that you want to deliver? Do you kind of keep your session length more flexible, or is it just you're willing to do more sessions, or is it just whatever comes through comes through?
I try my best to honor the time commitment that is made the initial contract for the program. I do note to people that there is the possibility that we may go 15 minutes over on occasion. And on occasion, we have gone 30 minutes over. I try to avoid that because I know that people, as I said, can only tolerate a certain amount of time online. But what I think I have done that makes up for the longer periods that my trainings used to go for is my increased clarity about what I am delivering. So I've taken the responsibility on myself, I think, to refine what I'm
Hmm.
teaching, to really get down to the essence and to really allow the passion that I have, the intentionality that I have to communicate these treasures that I believe are essential for human evolution to emerge concisely and with clarity. So that's what I mean when I say that this format has actually increased my intelligence
Hmm.
and increased my capacity with language and increased my creativity. So
Hmm.
I feel that I'm evolving as a result of the online format. And I know that this is what is supposed to happen now.
Hmm.
So there's a sense of being part of a greater movement that has to do with the evolution of humanity, which I think is the saving grace from all this suffering that is going on around us, which is heartbreaking and can bring me to a state of despair almost every day. What lifts me up is the felt sense, the experience of my own evolution and the way that that makes human evolution possible for others.
Hmm. I really appreciate what you're sharing here about the catalyst for really refining. It's counterintuitive. It's almost unexpected that this constraint of working online. And I imagine a lot of heart-centered people who resisted going online because they really prefer to work in person. They prefer the physical spaciousness. Um, but what you're saying is, there is this actual unexpected benefit because of the time and space constraints of the online format. It really forces you to distill an essence. And if you're willing to step into that, there's something really powerful that can emerge in terms of your ability to deliver something concisely, succinctly, powerfully in a way that resonates and in a way that delivers the message, the value that you have to deliver. And I think that's really remarkable.
It was completely unexpected,
Mm,
Lawrence. I am still delighted, amazed by this unfolding.
mm,
And as I mentioned, a student from that, one of my very first programs that I did online, it was called a foundations program. So the foundations program gives all the basic component parts of the Tara approach, which is a holistic, comprehensive system. So I condensed what was a 7-day residential program into a series of 25 hours in total. And many of my students who had attended those 7-day programs were almost outraged that I was doing this. The price is half as much, as it was for a residential program. And so some of those students were saying, wait a second, I traveled here, I invested all of this, and now you're doing it online for half that amount of money. How is that going to work? So one of the students from that very first program, I just met in person for the first time last night here in Chartres in France. And we were amazed that even though we were connecting in person for the first time, it was actually a continuation of the depth of contact that we had had online.
Only online before, right?
Yes.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So let's talk about that for a minute here. When you start your program, how do you approach the relational space aspect of it? You've got, how big are your groups usually?
Very variable, because I will teach a small group as easily as I will teach a large group. Some people will cancel a course if they don't have the requisite number. I have never done that. Even when I was working with the AIDS community, sometimes only 2 people would show up for a program because the other people who'd signed up were sick, but I would never abandon even 1 or 2 students. So my programs can be sometimes 8 people in a program and sometimes 50 to 100 people in a program. So it's really quite variable. I would say the majority of them is somewhere in between there, 10 to 20.
And when you start a new cohort, a new group of people, are these, I also imagine this is probably variable, but are they people you don't know very well or people that you're quite familiar with?
It's a combination, but I would say the majority, let's say for this practitioner training, which was a huge leap, a 9-month program online. And this woman who I'm meeting in France is in that program as well. That initially was mostly people I had never met before. This woman I had met in a previous program, and there are a few who I also had met in a previous program, but the majority were people I had never met before.
Perfect.
And who I now feel so close to.
Yeah, so this is what I want to unpack here. So how do you think about that? How do you approach that? When you've got a new group coming online, and what I'm getting is that the quality of connection is important to you. It's not just about the content. And do you design for that somehow? Does it happen automatically through the delivery of your experience? What is that initial, I don't know, like first or second session like, or even the first 20 minutes like, how are you creating the container and really approaching this aspect of the connection? Or is it just something that happens organically?
Well, I think I would step back even sooner before the program starts. I become very clear, and I've always done this, whether I taught in person or online. I almost have a perception of the group before I meet with them. So it's a meditative approach, I would say. It's based on intentionality. What is my purpose? Why am I even doing this program? And what I always come to is that I'm doing it for the people who are there. So my focus is on the people who are participating. The material, which is material that I am so excited about and that keeps evolving and that is miraculous from my experience, that's of course extremely important. But I am delivering that to people. I'm not just delivering material. So it's the people who are there are more important to me than the material. And that is felt and known to me from the get-go. So even that, precise schedule that you have to develop in an online program has to be more precise than an in-person program. That's my experience anyway. It has to really be to the minute. Even though you may discard it and morph it as you proceed, still you have to know ahead of time where the transitions are. when the
And,
breaks are going to
I'm
happen.
curious, I'll add a line to that too as well, because I feel like, you know, especially with the material that you teach, part of what you're creating is a safe space, and that precision of time. I mean, it kind of creates a little bit of like two sides to the working with time thing, kind of letting it go, but also, being very clear on the time boundaries of a situation, because I feel like that is part of the safety, that contains a container that holds a group of people, and particularly online.
Yeah, and I have a contract, you might say, a step-by-step document that
Hmm.
people receive ahead of time. So when
Mm.
people sign up for a program with me, they get a lot of material ahead of time to
Hmm.
prepare them. They don't always read all of it, but it's available. And one of the things they receive is that document about safety. And then that is reiterated
Hmm.
at the beginning, at the get-go, before anything really takes off. That document is placed in the chat and is sent to people again, so that people understand that there are certain responsibilities that we have to one another. And the program design, for the breaks and for the breakout rooms is also to create safety. So there is an organic sense that one starts to cultivate from teaching online, of when people need to come together into a smaller room, and when people need to take breaks, and when people need to step back from the material and play. So you
Mm.
build play into the learning. I mean, I'm teaching about trauma and the human nervous system and overwhelm. I can't overwhelm people with with the material. So it becomes, very playful and very organic and very human centered. So that, again, this focus is on the individuals. I'm transmitting to people who I really care about.
Mm.
These are people who I love. These are people who I'm entrusting what I've discovered with. It's my legacy. And I want to impart it with care for that legacy, but primarily for them. So, how, at what pace, with what rhythm are they able to absorb what I'm delivering? I'm learning from them all the time. And that's doable online. That's what creates the fluidity that kind of parallels the careful, precise structure.
Mm. Yeah, and I really love what you're sharing, because it very much mirrors our own experience. First, what you're sharing about, really caring about the people in the space. That in itself, um, it's such a novel experience, because we do kind of live in a world where, people are just always trying to sell you stuff, and it's like, just
Mhm.
buy my course, and then you're on your own. It's like, I've got my digital book, and once that transaction is done, it's done. And I think that's one of the differences with an experience that, like we're talking about, is that it's not just buy my course. It's like, once you're in this experience, there's something that comes through that's deeply humanizing, in just in the level of care and love that is felt in the space, and that in itself is already healing and transforming for the participants. And then the other thing you're saying about learning, and I feel like this is something that is so powerful about doing work online, is that you kind of have faster iteration loops. You have like faster feedback loops where you can really learn. And the thing is that, in our experience too, that there isn't like a right rigid formula for this stuff. It's really what works. What works for Stephanie with the particular body of work that she's doing, and the particular people that show up, because the next group might be a little bit different, and that same approach might not work so well. And so there's a process of really being flexible and learning, and receiving and iterating, and kind of like a lot of humility. I like to think about it. It takes a lot of humility to do this work online. I'm curious if, do you have a favorite activity that you like to work with, like a specific, like you mentioned, play, or something that you like to, that you kind of come back to, that you like to throw in there, or a question or something that's one of your favorites?
I like to bring movement
Hmm.
into my programs. I'm a mover. In fact, people often comment that I'm not static. I don't stay still. I can't, because I'm so excited and I'm so passionate about what I'm delivering. And so I like to extend that, to actually amplify that and get people to move. So what's interesting about these kind of boxed experiences is that we are actually looking at the social engagement system of the human nervous system. So the network of expression that's in the face and the eyes and the shoulders and the hands and the arms, that's what we see here. And that is the social engagement system. It's the polyvagal system. It's the system of human connection. So I want to expand that. So, a lot of people are frozen, whether they're online or in person. They're just, there's a way in which our Western culture has dampened that social engagement system. So I like to bring it forward and give people the opportunity to have movement with each other. So an exercise that I might do would be to deliver a feeling to you, Lawrence, for instance, through movement online. So I would actually, let's say I wanted to deliver a message to you about the social engagement system, which is this network of animation that is our birthright. And I want to convey that to you, but without language, without the technical language of the 12 cranial nerves, which comprise the social engagement system. And I create a movement, and then I deliver it to you. And then I ask you to deliver your response to me through movement.
I
So
love that. So
that's
conversation with movement. And when you do that, do you? So let's say, I mean, I see there's two ways you could do this. One is I could know what you're about to communicate with me, and then you communicate it with movement. In this situation, would I know that you're communicating to me about this, or would I just receive your movement and respond?
You can play with it so many ways. So we could do it that way, where I'm actually saying I want to deliver the understanding of the social engagement system and the 12 cranial nerves to you as my student without language, but just through movement. So that would be one
So I
thing.
kind of, yeah, I know what to expect. And then another version might be where the prompt is just to communicate something that's important to you through movement without giving the verbal context.
That might be a fantastic closure. So the closures of a session online, those are the most challenging to me.
Oh, tell me more. I love this. Okay.
It's always hard for me to separate from people anyway, but it's even harder online because I haven't actually, been able to embrace them. Because
So you
embrace
mean the closure of the whole program or just of a session?
a session or the
Okay.
whole program, either one,
Mhm.
So I might, because those closures are so challenging, I might invite people to communicate how they feel at the end of a session through movement. And so they might do that to another person who is in that group. And then that person, and there's no words being said here. So I would deliver my feeling about closure to someone, and then they would deliver it to someone else. And then they would deliver their feeling to someone else. So it's a communication network solely through movement online.
So this would, just to be clear on the details of it and specifically we're talking about, this would be on a Zoom screen, and then you would deliver it, and then they would just pick the next person and kind of deliver it, and then that person would, so it kind of just like passes on as everyone is together in the space.
That's exactly right.
Love it. That's a beautiful activity.
Oh, and there's this lovely silence. So that's another thing to emphasize. You don't have to keep talking online. I think people think that they have to be talking heads like pundits or something. You don't have to do that. You can have these luscious moments of just soaking up the presence of the others. And that has been another surprise, kind of the heart opening, expansive sensory experience of being together with people after a moving event has taken place, and just being quiet together online. That really increases resilience, and it also builds community.
Yeah, we find the same thing. I mean, first what you said about, really welcoming silence and moments of stillness in an online context, especially online where I feel like it tends to be very content dominated. It's really about, and you have people who run Zoom calls they just talk for 60 minutes and, weaving spaciousness and moments of stillness to really receive and let something process and sink in. Super, super powerful. Yeah, yeah. And also there's something about online that if you really create the permission for that, um, there's something, people relish it, and it's amazing what comes through. It's unexpected how much of that relational aspect of really being able to feel each other is possible when it's invited, when it's really given the space in a digital format, even though you're not in the same room. I almost have a theory that there's a safety because that person is not right next to me. There's a certain safety that that happens in an online space that can allow a person to relax a little bit in this kind of silent situation. That's my theory. I don't know.
Well, I have another theory that is along those lines, and this is very true for me, that when the pandemic started and I began to translate everything I do to online, I really was acutely conscious of the suffering in the world.
Mm,
And that made the online experiences even more precious.
mm,
And I really want to go back to that word humility that you used, because I'm in complete agreement that this whole process has engendered humility. There was a way in which I couldn't contain the authenticity of who I am, so the effort to try to perform accordingly, professionally, or the way I thought I should do it, just began to melt away. Of course, I tried to do that. I've always tried to do that, try to be a good girl, try to do it right. But it just became so unnecessary
mm,
in the passion of the need to really connect. And it became quite clear to me, and I think to everyone else in these groups, that the more authentic we were, the more evolution was going to occur, the more learning was going to
mm,
occur, and the more connection was going to occur.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is for, in our work, we always say transformation happens in a space where people become deeply present to themselves and each other. And a big part of that process is authenticity. And I feel like, I mean, the subject of authenticity is so deep, but it really starts with really being present with what is there for you, for another person, for, you know, your self-expression, and being able to be with another person's self-expression. There's just in that that whole space, there's so much richness there um, for creating a healing space, for creating a healing environment. So
I really
no,
want
go
to
ahead.
link that. I want to link that to healing from trauma,
Mm,
and just share very transparently. I became uh, a trauma expert because of my own trauma, and one of the um, qualities that comes with trauma very often, and certainly for me, was a lack of confidence. A sense that authentic, unique brilliance that is mine wasn't good enough, or wasn't going to be respected, or was going to be poo-pooed or denigrated. And that experience that the only thing I really had was my authenticity has actually erased and
mhm,
continues to erase that lack of confidence. So that, and this is another surprise that has come from the online experience for me personally, that is, I feel that I truly do have something unique to deliver, and that I respect it. And it doesn't need any fancy trappings or any comparisons to anything else that anybody is doing in order to be good enough, that it is good enough. And that has really evolved for me personally through this online experience, and the humility and kind of the nakedness, the stripping away of any effort to show up in a certain way, to just be more and more and more of who I truly am.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to add one final nuance to that, which is then this really speaks to the power of relational spaces, and particularly online, is for me also similarly kind of, on a long journey of working with my self-confidence and self-consciousness, being in spaces where I could practice, being authentic, being in spaces where I could really practice being myself in a way, with people who could witness that and hold that and kind of, offer me just a felt validation in a way, in a positive way, kind of a felt holding of me being me, offered me the confidence to carry that into other spaces that maybe weren't so nurturing. And I feel like this is a big part of, the power of creating spaces like this, where what this dynamic that you're talking about is a synergistic process. The part of it is you said, like, all I have is my authenticity. Part of that is that realization, and then part of that is the birthing of that, to through the reflection and the holding of other people. And that's it's such a powerful, subtle process.
I want to add also that what has evolved for me as a result of doing online work that would not have evolved without it is collaboration. So I am partnering with more people as a result of being online. And that is multifaceted in that, because the connection with the participants is so central to me, I don't always want to be managing the technical aspects because that can be challenging. I sometimes have difficulty, for instance, when I'm delivering material, reading the chat, reading people's comments. And I have an obligation to read the chat because that's their input. But I have trouble just in terms of focusing to take my attention away from the people that I'm paying attention to. So I have collaborated with some of my advanced students, and they have evolved and moved forward and are now at a higher level of teaching as a result of coming into teamwork with me. And they are now running their own programs with their own student collaborators. And that wouldn't have happened in the same way at all if I hadn't been required to translate everything to an online format.
Yeah, and what you're sharing is brilliant on so many levels. One is that we see this all the time also, is the value and necessity of collaborating, particularly to manage the aspects of an online learning experience, like the chat and the different things. And the other side of it, which is maybe like the subtle secret that, the only few know, is that the best way to learn something is to support a teacher. The best, if you really want to go deep, find a way to be in service of a teacher you want to learn from. And the relationship that you will build as their collaborator will be the richest learning experience you could possibly have, more than you could ever you would get from any course you could take with them. So that's the gem of value, if nothing else, from our conversation here, the secret. So I want to kind of land our conversation here. Maybe just one or two more questions. If you have one piece of advice for somebody who's really serious about creating a relational experience online, what might it be?
I think that word authenticity is the one I really want to underscore. That when you are challenged to present a program online. And initially, it is a challenge because of the format, because of the structure, because of the technicalities. Look at that challenge as an opportunity to do it in your own way. Give yourself that space and that freedom, and allow yourself to know, and this is very connected to what I believe is needed at this time for the evolution of humanity. Allow yourself to know that you have a completely unique gift that nobody else has. And that acceptance and spaciousness that you give yourself for that unique gift will spill over into how you present your program, and give yourself the space to do that. Definitely learn from other people. I watch others doing programs like you, like your beautiful wife, like Jim Garrison, who I work with at Ubiquity and Humanity Rising, and I learn from you, but I give myself the space in my programs to do it my way. So I want to emphasize that piece of advice. Give yourself space to be unique and authentic in this online setting.
I love that, and I will just add the nuance that one way to do that is to continually be experimenting. Because someone might say, "What do you mean? I don't know how to do this in the online work," and none of us know how to do this in the online world. Where it's continually prototyping and trying to really find your unique expression online. Yeah, beautiful. Stephanie, thank you so much for our time together, for making this time, for just sharing so authentically and honestly about your experience. I feel like there's some real gems of value that have emerged, and just really honor your work and your commitment and everything that you offer to the world. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you for your stimulating questions. They have really evoked even more new creativity for me. And thank you for what you do. The beautiful attunement and resonance that you create in your programs is so valuable and so needed, and is making a contribution at this time. So thank you, Lawrence.
Thanks.